So today's kind of fun. We get to start in VRay for the first time. VRay is a bit daunting. That's the easiest way to describe it. It has a lot of options and a lot of control. That being said, it's the most accurate renderer out there. So you're going to get really true light renderings. You're going to get really good atmosphere. You're going to get a lot of stuff out of it. But it takes a long time to really learn it and understand what the options are. The only thing that I can do is keep breaking it down into small chunks and giving you small chunks at a time. It will be your nature to want to do a lot more than I'm giving you. Or you'll want to do, say, glass. And you want to render something in glass. And you'll do it, and you'll assign a glass material to something, and it just won't look very good. And it takes a while to get those things kind of sorted out and really comfortable and easy. It also builds a lot. So let's use glass as the example. If you don't have an environment, if you don't have clouds in the sky and you don't have sun, glass doesn't look very good. Part of the reason we see glass and it looks good is because it has a bunch of reflections of stuff around it. Right? Glass as a material by itself, if we were to look at it with no external lighting or whatever, is very plain. Right? It's all the extra stuff that makes it valuable. So it takes time to get through that and to really understand that before we can get there. So what we're doing today is we're going to understand very, very basic materials and kind of fundamental changes, like what makes a material red versus blue. So we're going to deal with some very basics, and I'll walk you through that and kind of how it shows up. So the first thing that I'm going to ask you to do is to open up Rhino, and we're going to create a basic composition of 5 objects. And it doesn't matter what those objects are, but they need to be 3-dimensional objects. And so I'm going to make perspective view my large view here. I am in inches. I like to confirm that. And then I'll draw some objects. And again, it doesn't really matter what scale they are or how big they are. We're just going to start with a basic cube. So I'll draw a cube there. Okay, that looks nice. Let's switch into shaded mode so I can kind of see what it looks like in shaded mode. And then let's go ahead and create some other objects. So underneath the cube are a bunch of other objects that I can pick from. And so we're going to pick a variety of them and kind of create a little composition. And we can, of course, adjust the orientation of the camera as we get there. And so we'll drop a few more shapes in. I'm not opposed to having a few shapes overlap a bit, because it's always interesting to see how they overlap. Don't want 2 pyramids. Sorry, I'm trying to get these established here. Let's move that over a bit. And let's do one more little rectangle in front. So I'll adjust this a bit, and I'll get to a view that I kind of like. And again, it doesn't matter what the objects are, it doesn't matter what the view is, but we're trying to get something that is reasonable for these renderings. And in an ideal world, we're going to render all of the same view. Right? So we really don't want to move around. We're going to stay with this view and move forward from there. So now that I have those, I'm going to follow the VRay 8.1 tutorial to go through some of the basic options so that I'm ready. So I can pull that up on the digital tools site here. I can go to tutorials, VRay 8.1 basic options. And the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that my current renderer is, in fact, VRay. So if I go up to Render and I go to Current Renderer, it should say VRay for Rhino. Right? Some of you, it will say Rhino Render, and you'll want to switch over to VRay for Rhino. Okay? They are having a bit, as a side note, they're having a bit of trouble with the computers and the configurations of such. They have not been imaged this semester yet. Some of them aren't logging in. Some of you log in as your own username and password. If you do that, a lot of times things will be messed up. And they won't have the correct toolbars in the correct places. and the network render won't work and whatever. So we're trying to work through it and fix that. In an ideal world, you'll use the default student account, not your own personal account in this lab, because it really messes things up with the rendering, and it's set up really well for the student account, but not necessarily for every individual person. And we're trying to save you the work of having to customize things as you go forward. So anyway, we're working on that. How nice. Windows has detected that my computer's performance is slow. How nice, right? Anyway, we'll ignore that for just a second. I should have these VRay toolbars available. If they're not available to you, it's possible that we're in one of those configuration errors. We can load those manually. I have them posted on the website. If you go under Resources, Downloadable Resource Packages, at the bottom of this list, there'll be VRay Toolbars for Rhino. If you need it, you can right-click and save it. You only have to download it once. As soon as it's saved on your flash drive, that's fine. And to load it, you're going to go to Tools, Toolbar Layout, and then go to File, Open, and it'll show up as VRay for Rhino, in which case you can click it, make sure that they're checked, and say OK. If you're having trouble with that, I'll help you load it up. Again, it's computer dependent. Such is the nature of the lab right now. The other thing that I will tell you, it doesn't really matter for the renderings we're doing today, but it doesn't hurt to beat you over the head with this early, is that when you first start up the computers, there's a little icon here that shows up at the bottom that if you open it up looks like this kind of junky command line. And everybody's default action when they open one of these computers is just to close it. Okay? This is actually the interface for the network render. And so if you want to harness other computers, it's always a good idea not to close this. Okay? And to leave it open on any computer that you see. Right? It's everybody's nature. Did you close it? Yeah, it happens. No big deal. You can always reopen it again. I tell you about it now so you can get in the habit of just leaving it minimized. If I could run it as a system tray icon, I would just do that. But it's something that you're going to end up really, really liking, and you'll learn to leave it open. But for right now, it doesn't matter for what we're doing today, because we're not even going to do network rendering. OK, so we'll continue on with VRay 8.1 as we go through the options. The first thing that we're going to do is click on this O icon for the VRay options. And if you don't have this toolbar yet and you haven't been able to load it, no big deal. It's also available from the menu. If you go up to VRay and go to Options, you'll get to the same place. Okay? And so this is what's called the VRay Option Editor. And we look at this first menu and it's like, oh, it's not too bad. You know, there's a few options. The problem is, if you open any one of these drawers, right, if I click on Global Switches, for example, there's a bunch more checkboxes. And so if I continue down here into System and into Camera, you can see that this becomes a very, very daunting list very quickly, right? And so luckily for us, it comes up as a very small list, so it doesn't look quite so bad. But we're going to go in and we're going to adjust a few options to make sure. Most of the things that I'm going to ask you to do are set up as the default. So there's really not a lot you have to do, but it helps me to kind of go through and explain what's going on here as we go forward. So I'm going to keep flipping back and forth to this. The first thing that we're going to look at is something called Global Switches, which is the general overall settings. And so if I open up the Global Switches drawer, we're going to look at some various options, right? And so as we go down here, under Geometry, we're not going to worry about anything. Under Lighting, we do want to have lights on, right? We're going to have a light in this scene. Hidden lights would be if we had lights that were on a layer that were turned off. If we wanted them to shine anyway, we could check the box for that. Usually, you want it to be off. Default lights, again, you want to be off. Shadows, you want to be on. And you want to be the Show GI Only to be off. Right? And so, again, the default options that came up were exactly what I want, but it doesn't hurt to go through it and make sure. Right? So we do want to render the final image. So that's good. Low thread priority is always checked by default, just in case we are trying to do something else on the computer. It won't consume all the computer's resources, etc. Under here, under materials, we definitely want reflections to be on, so that's good. These levels, so max transparent levels, it's how many different transparent materials you can go through, right? So if it's set to 50, chances are you're not going to have more than 50 transparent materials stacked on top of each other, okay? And so there's the rest of these options are all fine by default, and so we're good, okay? Let me jump back over here, right? Again, default lights, it's unchecked, GI, right, hidden lights, low thread priority, good. Next, we're going to move to the little drawer called Environment. And so we'll come down here to Environment. Now, this one doesn't have quite so many options, right? But we're going to check on a few things. I want to make sure I'm following along here. We're going to check on the GI skylight and make sure that the color is 250, 252, and 255. Right? So I'm over here at GI skylight. There's a color. See that white? What's white right now? Right? And I'm going to type in a value. So right here, under R, it was 250. Green was, hold on, I got to jump back and double check here. 250, 252, and 255. And 255. And so what we did was, and on the projector you're never going to be able to see this, but we went from being pure white to having a little bit of blue in it, right? Which is basically mimicking sky. We have a little bit of blue. So it makes the rendering slightly better. Okay? So you're not going to see much. If you didn't do it, probably wouldn't ever notice. Okay? And then we'll go ahead and hold on a second. I want to make sure I have the rest of my options right. Under background, right? This is the background color of the rendering. And so right now it's set as black right here, which is fine. We could ultimately switch it to be white if you wanted just a white sky. For now, I'll go ahead and click on white. Right, so I have white and white. Okay, so we're good. And the indirect illumination should be on by default. Yeah, we're good. All right, so now we've made it through 8.1, okay, and we're going to continue on with VRay 8.5. And so I know these are a lot of step-by-steps to do, but when we're first getting started with VRay, there's a certain number of things that we kind of have to go through. Creating infinite planes is going to be really easy, and you're going to start doing it very frequently. Basically, when we're modeling in Rhino, there is no ground. Right? We have a plane that we're modeling on, but there's no ground. So if I were to render, say, with a sky as a background, if I didn't put in ground, the sky would continue underneath me, and I'd be floating in midair. Okay? So we need something, we need ground. And what VRay uses as ground is something called an infinite plane. And this infinite plane is basically a flat piece of ground that goes off into infinity. Right? It goes to the horizon. It's represented by a rectangle that's reasonably sized. So even though the rectangle doesn't actually go into infinity, it's represented by this rectangle. So to create this, I'm going to click on the infinite plane button. Right? So we can go ahead and close the options for right now. It's this icon right here. It looks like a little perspective of a rectangle with arrows coming off of it. And when I click on that, it just drops it into the scene. And you see that I went from having it here, right, where I had the grid, to having a surface on the ground. You guys kind of see how that worked? Okay, so really easy to do. If you don't have the toolbar, I forget whether it's available underneath in here. You might have to type infinite plane. Yeah, viz infinite plane is the command line. But if you start typing infinite plane, it'll show up. Okay, so I have that infinite plane established, and by default, it's going to be the default material, so I don't have to worry about assigning it a material. Okay? So the next thing that I need is I need a little bit of lighting in the scene. I have no lights in the scene. When we did on the first day when we did exercise 101, I had you download a file that already had a light in it. Right? But since you're starting from scratch today, we're going to actually have you create a light. And we're going to create a light using what's called a directional light. It's not as powerful as the sun. It just kind of simulates a sun. We don't start with suns because there's a bunch more options to do with suns, and we would have to go through all those options. So we're going to start with a very basic light. It's called a directional light, and it's available, if I can find it. Wouldn't it be... Why do we not have directional light?
You don't have it. You don't have it. It's an arrow.
I know. It should be an arrow. Why don't I have it? It's really weird. Go figure. So I'm going to just type directional light. It gets the same place. So you guys have it on your toolbar? And go figure, right? And so this one's a little bit complicated to create. And so instead of starting with directional light, what I tend to do to make it easy is I tend to make a quick box. that will allow me to position the light from corner to corner in the box so I have it pointing down. If you just create a directional light from scratch, which I'll do here in a second, and I say, oh, well, you know, let me turn off ortho. I want it to be kind of pointing down on my object about there, right? When I click, what happens is it ends up creating it perfectly flat on the ground plane. And that light isn't what we want. So it's much easier to have built a temporary little box, something like this, and then to type directional light or select it. And it's going to say end of light direction vector, which basically means the target that it should be pointing at. So I'll pick this corner of the box. And then the start of the light direction, I'll pick the opposite corner there, which means that the light is going to be shining from the right down toward the left, which means I'll get the shadows on the left side of each of these objects. The directional light works kind of as an infinite array of lights shining just in one direction. So it's not like it's a spotlight and it's shining at a particular point and it's a cone. It's kind of ambient light going this way, right? Kind of like the way the sun is. It's just much less powerful than that. Okay, so general lighting. Once I have that, I'll go ahead and delete this box. And now we can see that I have, I'm going to leave this view showing for just a second. We can see that if I were to orbit around, you can see that I have that little directional light that's kind of pointing down in that direction. So the easiest way to create it is to actually work with a little box and then establish it that way. All right? You can do it after the fact, and you can adjust it, and you can work in multiple views. So there's other ways of doing it. This tends to be the easiest, fastest way of getting a result. Okay? So we have our directional light. Now, since I'm going to render this one view over and over and over again, right, today, it's helpful to save this view, so I can always go back to it. So if I accidentally orbit around my objects, I can come back and render the same thing. And part of the reason I'm asking you to render the same view is because we're going to make some changes, re-render, and you're going to see what those changes do. Right? So it's helpful to stay with the same view. So I'm going to jump way up in the tutorials to 5.28. So if we go here to, excuse me, it's Rhino 5.28. Under saved views, it's going to show me how to save this view. Okay? And so what I'll do is I'll come over here to this little triangle next to perspective, and I'll go to set view and then named views. And when I click on that, it will bring up the named views dialog box here that then has one of those little floppy disk icons for save the view. And so I'll name this view render 01 and go ahead and click save. And the advantage of this, it's kind of like scenes in SketchUp. Anybody ever use scenes in SketchUp? Where you save a scene? This is essentially the same thing. What I can do now that I have this saved is I can move around and I can look at my object and, oh, okay, that's interesting. And then I can ultimately come back here to set view, and there's render 1, and it's always going to jump back to that same view. So it's the same thing as a SketchUp scene. It's just for Rhino. Apologize, I have to change mice because this one's being sticky again. The view? Yeah, absolutely. So incidentally, that's good. I'm glad you asked that. If I ever go through something and you say, well, wait a minute, I got lost, right? Please stop me and we'll go back through it again, right? A lot of times I'll go through things multiple times anyway because it's helpful. And if you guys aren't giving me the feedback, then I just assume you know what we're doing and I just keep going. Yeah. Okay, well, the defaults are all fine because I didn't actually change anything. Is it not? Let me have a look. Is it not loading up, or let's see? Go to Rhino and let's see. Go to render, current renderer. Click on VRay for Rhino. Render plugin of VRay for Rhino. There's the options. Total switches. Yeah, see, all of these are already set as fine as the default. Okay, you should be good now. All right. render, current renderer. Ah, how nice. Try a different computer.
Okay.
Sorry. You could potentially restart, and it might work.
Oh yeah. Okay.
But it's up to you. And you're good. You already have it. Sorry to do that to you. Turn on this end snap, and then you'll be able to go from there to there. Okay, so I think we put out those fires, so we'll continue on. Actually, I think what would be easiest is I'm going to pause the recording for a second. I'm going to walk around and make sure everybody's at this place, because once we start getting into the materials, it would be helpful if you guys could follow along while I did it. So let me make sure everybody's there, and then we'll continue on. I did notice that I said to select 640 by 488 as the output size. The computers are powerful enough now to where it's not really as critical. So the default output size is fine for what we're doing today. Okay, so now we're going to start into kind of our basic materials and working through how the materials work. So we'll go to VRay 8.2, assigning materials. All right, and so first thing that we're going to do is select the object itself. And so I'm going to start with the cube in the center. You can pick any of your objects. Okay, and I'm going to go to the little button that says M on it, which is material. It's the VRay material editor. If you don't have the button, you can get it to it from the VRay menu and go to material editor. And so this VRay material editor window you're going to become very familiar with, but this is where you load in all your materials or you create new materials for anything that you want to create. And so right now we're going to create a basic material. And so I'm going to right click right here where it says Scene Materials. You see that I have no materials available right now. And so I need to create a basic material. I will right click on Scene Materials and I'll get some options. The first one is to create a material, right? Or I can load a material, or I can load a material collection, right? Generally, we're going to stick with one of the first two, depending on what we're doing. Either we're going to load something that somebody already made, or we're going to create something from scratch. For right now, we're going to create a material, and it's just a standard material. These other types of materials are specialty materials. We just need a standard material to start. And so I'll go ahead and click on Standard, and you'll see that below Scene Materials, I now have something called Default Material. Okay? For clarity purposes, I'm going to rename the material. So I'll right-click on it and say Rename Material, and we'll call this Red for lack of something better. Okay? You could pick a different color if you want. So now that I have my scene materials and I have a material called Red, when I click on Red, and it's highlighted in blue here, I get a bunch of options. Right? And so you're kind of seeing how VRay works. Right? Everything has these drawers. So we could have those all collapsed, or we could open them up. Okay? And this is giving us the most basic set of options that define a material. The first thing under diffuse, which is general color and transparency properties, it's going to give me something called color, and it's going to give me something called transparency. Under color, let's change the color to be red. Right? So I'll click on where it says color, which is gray, and I'll pick red instead, and I'll go ahead and say OK. And when I do that, I can click on this preview button, and it'll give me a preview of what my material looks like, which is now a red material. Okay? So this is the most basic material that you can make. Right? I'm going to continue by assigning this to the square that I already had selected. Okay? So I'm going to right-click where it says red here, and one of the options is Apply Material to Selection, which basically says make this red material go on that cube that I have selected. So I've now done that. I can close it, and that now has red assigned to it. Okay? It's a little bit difficult because I can't see that it's red that's been assigned to it. I personally like to work in this shaded view because I think the geometry is easier to see. If I switch from shaded view to rendered view, I can now see that that material has been assigned the red material. Okay? It's right here, this triangle. We've worked from wireframe, shaded, now we're at rendered. Right? So while we're assigning these materials, maybe it's not a bad idea to have it in rendered mode. But you can see how you get much less detail. You don't get the little lines that outline your object. It's much harder to see. Right? So I have my cube assigned first as red. Now I'm going to go to another material and create a new material and assign it, say, blue or any color you want. We're going for 5 materials and 5 colors. So I'll repeat this again. Right? With the object selected, I'll click on the M for material editor. And I want to create a new material because I already have red. So let's go ahead and right-click on Scene Materials, Create Material, Standard. And we'll rename it this time. And I don't know, green. And then I'm going to change the color of this material to be green. And then I'll go ahead and say OK. If I preview that material, we'll see that it shows up as green. Okay? I need to assign green to the object, that cylinder back here. So I'll right-click on green and say Apply Material to Selection. And we'll see it change into green. Okay? So again, I'm going to repeat it for each one of these 5 shapes. Pick a color, right, and I'll assign it. So let me go ahead and go to my material editor again. Scene Materials. I'll right-click, Create Material, Standard. Right? One of the good things about repetition is you start to learn it because you've done it. Right? That's why I have 5 objects. So this time, I don't know, let's pick orange for fun. You can pick any color you want. Right? Let's rename this to be orange. Say OK. If I preview it, we're now going to see it as orange. And I can right-click on it, the name, and say Apply Material to Selection. And it turns orange. Okay. So one more time, we'll switch. And we'll go to my material editor.
So you just have the object selected.
You have the object selected, and then you right-click on the material and say Apply to Selection.
You don't have to close everything and change it?
You don't. I'm just doing it to practice so that everybody's seeing it. That's all. OK, that brought up a good thing. You may or may not have seen it. So VRay is a plugin that runs on top of Rhino. And every once in a while, it gets stuck thinking. And the options will gray out for a second. And it just happened to me. Generally speaking, if you just let it be for a little bit, it'll come right back. It just happens. It's one of the quirks of VRay. So let me go ahead and right-click on Scene Materials again. Create Material, Standard. Change the color. I don't know, let's do a purple color this time. And we'll call this purple. I'll say OK. And we can preview purple. There it is. Right-click on purple. Apply Material to Selection. And there it is as purple. Now I have one last piece that's in front. So we'll go to Materials one more time. Right-click, Create Material, Standard. And this one, I don't know, we'll do some kind of a turquoisey blue. Right? And we'll rename this to be blue. And I'll right-click, Apply Material to Selection. And now that's a turquoisey blue. Okay? So relatively easy to get those initial materials applied. Once I have those materials applied, I didn't apply a material to the ground. Right? I'm just doing it to my shapes. I'm going to come up here and I'm going to click the R button, the blue button with the R in it. And this is actually going to do the first render for me. Okay? And it goes rather quickly. Right? This is my first render. It gives us a little bit more information. We have the VRay progress window that actually scrolls through what's happening while it's happening, so you can look at it. For right now, it doesn't really matter, but as you go forward and you get more and more familiar, you can see, oh, it's hanging up right here. That's where the problem is, and then go fix it. And the end result, right, shows up here in the VRay frame buffer, which is right there. We can see that my light did actually cast some shadows. Right? There's a little bit of a shadow here on the ground. There's a little bit of a shadow coming across from these objects onto the other objects.
Yeah, sorry, how do you do the, oh, never mind, found it. How do you do it?
All right. If you go up to Render and then Render, it'll do it. OK, so I'm going to pause right here, and I'm going to come around and make sure everybody got to this stage. And then we'll keep going. OK, so I'm going to continue on a bit. And once I have this first rendering, I'm going to make sure that I save the rendering. And so if I look at the VRay frame buffer window here, there's a save icon. There's actually two save options. The first one is just save image, and the other one is save all image channels. For right now, we just need the image, so we're just going to save the image. There will come a point where you're going to want this other one, but we haven't gotten there yet. Okay? So for right now, it's just the plain save icon. And I'm going to go to my flash drive. And let me create a folder here. Have some organization. 204. And we'll call this 204-1. And I'll go ahead and click Save. Okay, so this is the first image that I was trying to do. Okay, so now that I have it saved, we can confirm that by going to my flash drive. And there it is. And that's my first image. Okay? Now, the reason that I'm saving each one is I'm going to make some changes and see what happens. And I want to be able to see each image and how it changes. Okay? So, next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to change. I just want to make sure I'm following in the correct order here. I'm going to adjust the transparency of two of the objects. So the objects are already assigned. So I already have the orange, the green, the purple, the red, and the blue. But I'm going to start tweaking the materials and then performing a new render. So I don't actually have to assign the materials to the objects anymore. That's already been done. I'm just changing the materials now. So let's bring back up the material editor here. And I'm going to pick two of the materials. So if I'm dealing with transparency, it makes more sense to do one that's in the foreground rather than one that's in the background. So I want to pick one that has some other objects behind it so I can see what's happening. So let's, for me, I'm going to do the blue. Let me look at my object here. I'll do the red and the blue as the two that have some transparency. Okay? So we'll start with the blue. And if I were to preview it, we get that it's just a solid kind of blue sphere. Okay? If I change the transparency, so again, I'm just in this diffuse drawer. Right now, the transparency is set as black. Okay? The way the transparency works is it takes the value of the color, right, between white and black as the level of transparency. So if I had a 50% gray, the object would be 50% transparent. Does that make sense? So the closer it is to black, the more solid it is. The closer it is to white, the more transparent it is. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this transparency, and I'm going to set it as dark gray. And I'll go ahead and say OK. And now if I click on Preview, we'll see that my object switched from being opaque to being semi-transparent. Okay? Now if I move to the red here, and I adjust the transparency, and instead of it being dark gray, I might go to light gray, and I say OK. If I preview it, we see that it's very, very transparent. Right? Maybe it's too transparent. But for right now, let's let it go, and let's see what happens. Okay? Obviously, if we were trying to do glass, it would be extremely transparent. Right? So I'm going to go ahead and leave that. I don't actually have to assign the materials to the objects anymore, because it's the same materials already been assigned to the object. Okay? So all I have to do is go back and re-render the image. So I'm going to click on the R again, and I'll render again. And we now see that my red is very transparent, and my blue is kind of semi-transparent. Okay? I'm going to adjust my red to be not quite so transparent so we can see a little bit more of it. So I'll go back to my materials. I'll go to my red material, and instead of being light gray, I'm going to say it's gray. Incidentally, if you scroll all the way down, there's a much broader range of grayscale colors that you can pick. Right? You can also type in percentages or RGB values. So we'll go ahead and go with gray. And if I were to preview it, I get a little bit more of it. And then I'll go ahead and render it again.
So you have a figure, and you assign some color to it. How do you know which color it is?
Couple things. One, assigning it by individual object is actually not very common when we go forward. For right now, we have 5 objects. We assign 5 materials to the 5 objects. Not a big deal. When we start to have really complicated buildings, or the first assignment, you're going to build some furniture, a chair and a table, when you start to have more than just a couple objects, you'll assign materials by layer. And then it's really easy to know because if it's on that layer, it's going to have that material. So for right now, the only real way of doing it is to switch into this rendered mode, and you'll see a preview of the material assigned. Now, you see that it tried in its rendered mode to approximate the transparency, but it's not nearly as accurate as what's happening here in the shadows in the actual rendering. So it's okay. Some people's preview of render works. Sometimes it's way too black. It's very dependent on what the light looks like and what angle it's at. So it's not always perfect. So once I have this view that has the transparency assigned to two of the objects, I'm going to go ahead and click on the Save icon. And this is going to be exercise 204-2. Okay, so now that I have two of the objects as transparent, I'm going to continue to go in and keep messing with the material settings. So I'll go back to the material editor. And this time I'm going to pick 4 of the objects and I'm going to add reflection to those objects. So I'm going to make them shiny. So instead of being dull, they're going to start reflecting each other. Okay? So let me look at my scene really quick. I'm going to pick one as just kind of a standard non-shiny object. Trying to think which one I want to be the non-shiny object. I'll do the orange. The orange cone is the non-shiny object. So I'm going to assign the rest of the materials as being to have some reflection. So I'm going to go to the material editor, and I'll start with blue here. And if I want to add reflection to this material, I have to right-click where it says blue, and I'll do this more than once. And there'll be an option for Create Layer, and I'm going to specify Create Reflection Layer. Okay? And so we see that when I select that, I now have something called reflection that's been added. So before we had diffuse on top where I changed the color and the transparency. Now we have something called reflection. Right? And this reflection has a bunch of settings for how the reflection is going to be applied. Right? The good news is the bulk of the default options are just fine here. Right? I'm going to show you what the options are, but you really don't have to tweak with them or mess with them. If I go to preview, we can see that it now has some shine to it. We're getting those reflection of those little squares, so we can start to see it being a little bit shinier. Okay? If I were to jump back into my view here and I were to render, this is looking more and more like a shiny object. Right? It has some reflection. So let me jump back to my material editor. I'm going to continue with this, but I want to show you some of the options. So under reflection here, generally in VRay, when you see a button, it's either going to have a small m or a capital M on it. The capital M means that somebody's changed some options. The small m means that nothing's changed and there's nothing assigned to it. So if we look at reflection here, right, there's one little button that has a capital M on it. That means that it has something going on. So if I click on that, it'll take me into the texture editor, and it'll tell me what type of reflection. Right? It's a Fresnel reflection. And it'll tell me the index of refraction and the refraction IOR. These are some technical values that have to do with the material that I can change that will change how shiny it is. Right? So if I had chrome and it was really, really shiny, I'd start changing these values. Right? And we'll get to that in a second. But for right now, we're going to stick with just basic reflection. So I've done it for blue. Right? We'll move on to green. I'll right-click on green, create layer, reflection layer. Right, there it is, default options. If I'm previewing it, we now see that that went from matte finish to shiny. Okay, I'll continue on. Orange I'm not going to do. I'm going to do purple. So let me right-click, create layer, reflection. There it is. If I were to preview it, we now see it as shiny. And we'll get to the red. Right-click, create layer, reflection, and it's now going to be shiny. Okay? So I have those 4. Everything except for the orange has shine applied to it. So I'll go ahead and close the material editor, and I'm going to re-render. So now we can see that the objects have changed a lot, and we're starting to really see the reflections in these objects. So in this cylinder in the back, in the green cylinder, we can see a reflection of the cone. We can see a reflection of the cube. We can see a reflection of the little, whatever shape this is, right? I don't know. I don't even know what to call that, but whatever. The purple shape, right? But we also see on this edge here that the reflection is almost entirely white, right? Or the color is almost entirely white. It's because it's reflecting the ground, right? And the ground is so white. So we're losing a little bit of the shape, but it is in fact accurate, right? The other thing that happens is if we look very carefully at the middle of this image, right? In the green, we have a reflection of the red cube, right? But the red cube has a reflection of the green in it, and vice versa. So then the reflection of the reflection has a reflection. Does that make sense? So it's snowballing back on itself. And that's part of what makes VRay so accurate, is it's not just I can see this object there and this object there. It's that there's levels of back and forth. So in the current settings, in the default, it will go back and forth 8 times. Right? So you get a reflection of the 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 reflection. Right? 8 times. We can change that setting. We could go to 16 times. Right? And at a certain point, you really can't see it anymore. But the point is that that's part of what makes VRay give you such accurate results, is because we're doing that. And if we look carefully here, we can start to see that happening. Okay? So I'm going to go ahead and save this as my next option. All right? So this was 2. We'll make it 3. And I'll go ahead and click on Save. And then I'm going to continue to adjust a few more. Okay? And part of this is I'm trying to show you what happens. Okay? So the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to actually adjust the reflection and increase it. Okay? So we'll go ahead and close this. And I'm going to go back to the material editor. And I'm going to pick on the blue once again so we can see it. There it is. And I'm going to click on the capital M that's in the reflection here. And I'm going to change this IOR value to be high. We'll change it to like 6. Right? And I'll go ahead and say OK. And now we can take a look at what it looks like here. And when I click Preview, you're going to see that the reflection is going to get a lot stronger. Right? It's still transparent, but I'm reflecting a lot more. It's very, very shiny. Okay? Let's do the same thing with, let's say, the purple one. Okay? I'm going to click on the M. And instead, the index of refraction, I'm going to go the opposite direction. So we'll say it at like 0.75 or something. And I'll say OK. And when I click Preview, it's not going to be quite as shiny. Does that make sense? So I'm controlling how much shine there really is and how polished that object was. Let's do one more. I did blue. I guess we'll do green. I'll click here, and we'll do this one as if it were green chrome. I'll do it at like 16. And I'll say OK. And when I preview it, look at how much of the surrounding we're going to see. Right? I'm losing some of the color because it's so shiny. Right? It's about as shiny as you can get. Okay? So now, if I go back to render this scene, right, let me open up my frame buffer here so you can see it. Right, that's what I had. Right? And now we're going to see a much, much shinier green, almost like a mirror, when I go ahead and render. Hold on one second. Okay, so you see that I now have a much higher reflection here. It's much shinier, it gives it almost like a mirror, and I'm reflecting all of the surroundings, much more than the color itself. So the fact that it was green is disappearing. We can still see that it's green from the inside where it's reflecting itself as being green, but from the outside around here it's reflecting almost entirely the environment and not its own color. So this is almost all white, and we see very accurate representations of these shapes and how they distort. You had a question?
Yeah, mine is really grainy for some reason.
All right, let me come around and have a look. I'm going to take a quick pause. I'll come around if you have individual questions, and then we'll come back and I'll do the next set. You? I don't remember whether I saved this or not. Not yet. OK, good. Let me go ahead and save it. We'll click on the little save. And this will be image 4. All right, then we're going to mess with one other setting. Right? I'm going to continue on with the green shape. So let me go to my options here. And here it is. Under glossiness, right, I'm going to change this reflection value to be down. Right, we'll say 0.5. And if we preview it, right, you'll see that it looks a little bit more matte in its finish. It's not as shiny. It has a little bit of texture to it. So we'll do that for green, and then for we'll do one for purple. And this time I'll change the reflection glossiness to 0.75. And preview, it's a little bit more matte. So you see that I'm getting the reflection, but it's not as sharp of a reflection. Right? And so I'll go ahead and close that. And again, that was right here under glossiness, the reflect value. And now we'll do one more render.
Just those two?
Just those two. And you might notice now that the render itself is taking a little bit longer because it's calculating that blurriness to the material. So as you add these options in, the renders can take longer and longer to do. Right? And so we have to be careful about which options we're picking and what the settings are. For right now, it's still going to finish within a minute or two. All right, so there it is. So you can see from the last one where we had perfect representations like a mirror to this one, it's now kind of blurry representation. So we're not getting as sharp of an image. So we changed that glossiness. Right? It's as if you had a shiny object that didn't have a perfectly smooth surface on it. Okay? So you can see how we're starting to tweak these settings and how relatively easily, with a few checkboxes, we can dramatically change the results that we're getting in these materials, which is part of what makes this such a powerful piece of software. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Save here. And we'll save this as 5. Click Save. OK, now I'm going to pause it again. I'll come around and make sure I answer your questions, and then we'll continue. OK, you guys all seem to be picking it up rather quickly now, which is excellent. So I have those 5 images where we went through various settings. The next part of this is probably the more realistic part, in that most of the time you're going to end up loading a material that somebody else has made. I will spend a little bit of time this semester talking about how do you make a material from scratch, because sometimes you can't find a material that's already been made. The good news is there's a bunch of pre-made stuff that we can begin with, and you can get a lot of the way there with pre-mades, and sometimes you can just tweak a pre-made material to match what it is that you want it to be. So on the Digital Tools site, if you go to Resources and then Downloadable Resource Packages, right? If you then scroll down, oops, it would help if I actually went there. If you scroll down, the first set is all for 135. The second set here is for 136, right? There's a zip file, right, of VRay materials. If you click on that file, it will take you to a Dropbox page, right, where you'll be able to download the file. Okay? Go ahead and download that zip file, and then you'll extract it onto your flash drive, hopefully in a folder called Resources. And the idea is that once you start having your Resources folder on your flash drive, that's where a lot of your materials are going to live. And you may find materials from outside of this class that you want to use. You'll put them in the Resources folder, and then you'll have those materials. You may ask your friends who've taken the class before, right, what materials they might have that might be valuable. And you lost your flash drive, so you're out of luck. Okay, so I have a resources folder here. I also have VRay materials that are available, and you can see that this is a pretty good list. Brick, paint, car paint, concrete, fabric, flooring, glass, interior walls, landscape. Those would be like grass and that kind of thing. Metals, right? If we went into metals, for example, aluminum, chrome, copper, Corten steel, gold, right? Screens, platinum. I mean, there's a lot of different options that are out there that you can use for renderings. Okay? It's going to take a little bit of time for you to download and extract this. On some of the computers, it will ask you are you sure you want to extract the files in an insecure manner or something like that. Just say yes, right, and extract them onto your flash drive. So once you have those materials, then it's a matter of loading the materials. So if I open my material editor again, remember we've been going to scene materials and right-clicking and saying create material. Well, directly below that is something called load material. And so if I click on load material, it's going to say, go find a file for me to load. And so the type of file we're looking for is a .vizmat file. And so if I go to my flash drive, and I go to my resources, and I go to my VRay materials, and I pick, let's do metal for right now, and let's do Corten for right now, right? Eventually, as I click through, I'll end up with something called a .vizmat, right? So this is Corten.vizmat. I'm going to go ahead and click on Open. And I'll now have something in my list of materials called Corten. And if I look at it, there it is. It's kind of a rusty material. Has a certain amount of reflection. Remember, right, we can go through and we can look, because now we understand how this stuff is working. There's a drawer for reflection. It has some reflection that's been assigned to it, right? Under color, it's not gray. It has what's called a map that's been applied to it, right? So if I were to click on the M, we could see there's the actual texture that's being applied to it. It came from a photograph, basically, of that material. Go ahead and say OK. Right, so there it is with a little bit of reflection. So I want to assign this to a material. So let's say I'll pick my cylinder here. Right, I'll right-click, and I'll say Apply Material to Selection. And now if I were to render it, this cylinder in the back would be that Corten steel. Okay? Now, when it's done rendering, the texture may be too big on my object or too small on my object. That's something called texture mapping. We're going to get into that in a couple weeks for how you fix that. But for right now, if it generally is applied to the object, we're happy. Okay? So I'm going to go ahead and stop this from rendering for right now, and I'm going to load up something else. Right? So let me go to my material editor here. I'm going to right-click, load material, and let's load up something. Go to stone, and right. So here's a stone wall, right, with a bunch of rocks, right, and I want that to apply to something. So let me go ahead and I'll apply it to this purple object, right. I'll right-click and say apply. Well, let's apply it to the blue object in the front here. Apply material to selection, right. And then we can go ahead and render it. And it's a little skewed because the texture mapping isn't applied, but you can see that now that stone wall has been applied to the object. So it's relatively easy to take a pre-made material and drop it on your object. So for your next rendering, you're going to go through and pick 5 materials. I don't care what they are, right, from that archive of materials that's on your flash drive. And you'll assign 1 to each of the objects, and you'll do 1 more render. Okay? And, yeah? Okay, I'll help you. And then at the very end, if you really want to, you can open your project from last class, and you could assign a material to the walls and render that. Okay? That part's, I'll leave it as optional. I do, however, want to go through the actual posting. So what I'll do is I'll come around and I'll help people get this last little bit of materials, and then I'll walk through step by step how to do the actual post. Okay? Okay, so I just wanted to walk through the actual posting of these images. There's a step-by-step on the back of the page that will walk you through it. But since we're posting so many images, it's nice to do the post with a little slideshow so that it cycles through as opposed to having it. If you've been in one of my classes before, you've probably done the slideshow before. But I'm going to walk you through it. It's pretty easy. It's just like a normal post. I'm going to go to New and then Post. I guess the only challenge is it takes a while to upload all the pictures at once. But once I have this is the same as we've been doing, so we'll call this exercise 204. Perfect. I'm going to go ahead and pre-categorize and pick my featured image just like I've been doing. So I'll come down here under Categories, and we'll call this exercise 204. And this is Digital Tools for Architects. And I'm going to come down here to my featured image, set featured image, and I'll pick one of my renderings as my featured image. I honestly, doesn't matter which one you pick, as long as there is one. And I will set it as my featured image. And then I'm going to come back up here, and under Format, so underneath where you normally push Publish, there's a checkbox for Gallery. And when I check that box for Gallery, from Standard to Gallery, there is a little slider that shows up below where I normally put my images, and it says Slideshow on Post Page. I'm going to turn that on. So I click on it, turns green. That means it's going to put a slideshow on. So from there, I'll go to Gallery here, and it's going to say Insert Gallery or Add Images. I want to add my images there. And the nice thing is that this will actually let me upload all of the images in one shot. So I can go ahead and let's go from Computer. And I'll go to Select Files. And I'm going to select the first file, hold down Shift, and select the last file. So I select all of them at once. I have 6. If you have 5, if you have 7, it's close enough, right? And I'll go ahead and click on Open. And this part takes a little bit of time. So you're going to see it go to 100, and then it's going to take a second, and then it'll say crunching, and the next one will go to 100. And you just give it a little bit of time, and it will get through all of them. All right, when I'm done, I'll click on this button for Save All Changes. And then I'll be presented with something called Insert Gallery. There's a little button. I'll go ahead and click on Insert Gallery. And then when I'm done with that, I'll go ahead and click on Publish. Okay. The instructions on the back say to go back and categorize and stuff after you do the post and the initial publish. Doesn't matter what order as long as you do it. Right? So once this publish is done, we'll keep our fingers crossed that it works. I can go ahead and I can view my post. All right. And we should see a nice little nifty slideshow here. Right, that I can cycle through my images and see all of them. Right? You'll also see them down here at the bottom. It looks like I uploaded one of them twice. Maybe that's why I had 6. But anyway, you get the idea where it's this nice little slideshow. Right? And that's the purpose. So it just makes it a little bit more convenient. Looks like most of you are already there, which is excellent. And so as long as you have that, that's what we're looking for at the end of class today. Okay?